Okay, for the gauge, you have this little plug here that's going to plug in to the back side of our oil distribution block where our sensor is. And then there's essentially two sets of wires that run up to this main plug. This plug is going to go into the gauge itself. For this car, this isn't going to be long enough by any means. The other set of wires here will end up, we'll have to look at the diagram, but I'm pretty confident power and ground. We'll have to see what these two are, but I know we're going to need the power and ground here. So those will all likely end up in this box with a key on trigger of some sort, or in the cab. I haven't decided where I'm going to run it. I'm not worried about the length of these wires, but our sensor wires are definitely not going to be long enough to make it all the way into the cab and up to where I want to put the gauge. So we're going to end up lengthening these two wires. Pretty straightforward. We're just going to clip them, add some length of wire. Make sure that you don't do it with cheap Walmart butt connectors. We're going to do it either solder them and heat shrink them, or use non-insulated crimps with heat shrink and some nice sheathing to protect it. But yeah, essentially that's definitely not going to be long enough to get us where we want to be, so we will be lengthening those. I'll probably run this as far as I can and try to do the splicing up in here somewhere so that it's less exposed to the heat and everything of the motor. Okay, so we are running the wire for our temp sensor. So like I told you, we're gonna have to lengthen these, so actually it makes it a lot easier. I went ahead and clipped them. I clipped them pretty far up. You can kind of be the judge. I left myself a good length there, but so that I can splice them in. But I clipped it pretty far up so that I could run as much of the sheathing that came with it through. So I ran it up through here. There's a little notch right back here that I've already ran my I ran some wires for the reverse switch for the manual swap that we did earlier on this car. I went ahead and ran them through the same area. Had it come through here. I will be I'll get this to focus, so we'll be pulling that a little bit tighter so it'll look something like that when it's done. But just kind of grabbed a few spots with some zip ties, fastened it. I routed it down with some other wires. Ended up fastening it there to our temperature sensor wire, and then got it plugged in down there where the sensor is. So one thing you want to be kind of careful of, and the reason I'm using zip ties, is you want to give yourself kind of a good U-shaped loop there. You don't want these wires coming off the sensor, since it's kind of facing the wrong direction. You don't want those wires to be tugged tight at a 90-degree angle. So I've got a nice little U-shaped loop down here for that wire, and then I've secured it so that it doesn't get pulled tight during the process. So pulled it up through here. So that's where we're at so far. I'm probably going to run the other wires from the inside out. Let me get this cover off, and then I'm going to find where we're going to tap into power and ground. I wanted to mount my gauge right here for the oil temperature, so I'm going to pull this out. In order to do it, you've got to pop this trim here, and I think there's a couple screws underneath that hold that. So you just grab a popping tool, get underneath it, pop it out. Can't do it one-handed, so but yeah, I'm gonna pop this trim out and then get that vent out of there. Okay, so there's two spots. This whole clip came out on mine. It should go back in, no problem. And then there's going to be two screws holding yours down. Somebody's had mine out before, so just one on mine, but just take those two screws and the whole thing will come out. It should be noted that you kind of have to wiggle these side to side to get them to break loose, and then you can pull. So kind of hard to explain, so I'll show you. If you close these vents on a downward angle, then you have to be really careful not to scar up like this here. You don't want to scar those up. But if you get them on a downward angle, you have to use two hands. Then you can kind of get a flathead or a small pry tool next to it and pry them over, and this should pop out. Okay, so once you get them all out of their little houses, if you get them diagonal enough, then you can start pulling them out. You just kind of have to work it. Okay, so the left-hand side, see if I can get it to focus, the spots where this sits are a little taller versus this side they're smooth. So these ones are going to be harder to get in, so we're going to go in this way. And then once it's kind of diagonal, we can kind of flex this over and get those to pop in. And then we'll get these ones seated, and then we'll work on the other side. So I did end up taking out the center pieces. I didn't think I was going to have to, but this particular gauge is pretty deep, so I ended up having to. I thought I was going to have to notch this down here, but I did test fit it, and you are able to kind of wiggle it and get it up over that ledge. This is a friction fit, so you don't need this the back clamping piece. You can just force it in. This was, man, it fought me to get in. I did end up having to put these sides in first and then this side. With this back piece out, I was able to kind of put it in at this angle and then feed these in, and then you can squeeze this center piece over to hit this side. So next, I'm just going to drill a hole in the bottom somewhere in here so that I can run my wires through, and then I'm going to plug this in, feed the wires, and then press fit it all at once. Once you get it in there, it's pretty difficult to rotate, so try to push it in as straight as you can. Okay, so there is the finished product. Excuse the light. I think it turned out pretty good. Like I said, I just popped a hole just big enough for the two wires to come through, just right there. I'll feed those in, get this reinstalled, and then basically everything else is going to be happening from underneath the dash. I may go ahead and extend these wires while they're easily accessible. These go to the temperature sensor. If you remember, we cut those earlier, so I may go ahead and just at least splice these ends on, get some sheathing on it, so that I'm not trying to do that from under the dash, too deep under the dash later. So yeah, I might throw those in, but then but that's basically the basic idea if you're going to do this style of gauge mounting. So and then this still works, so this will still open and close. So I mean, for the most part, these are pretty resilient gauges and stuff, but you don't want to just blast the back of them with a bunch of heat all the time if you can, avoid it. So that's the one downside to putting them in a vent like this. A lot of people will just leave them closed. I like the side defrost, so I will be using it. But yeah, that's basically the gauge install. Alright, so under the dash here, you're gonna have a few screws. Mine's missing one, but here, and then a pop clip over here. And then you've got this guy back here, which just twists. Just half a turn like that, and it'll come loose. And then there's a few clips up here. Mine's torn off over here, unfortunately, but I do have one over here. And the best way to go about it is to get a flat blade. See if I can get it to focus. There we go. You get a flat blade screwdriver or a pry tool of some sort, and you just lift up on this guy right here to release it. So like that. and that'll release off of there. So we're gonna get this under dash off. Once we do, there's a few things you got to do for the OBD port and stuff if you're gonna get that far. I might not take it completely out. We'll have to see how much room we have, but we just need to get enough clearance to be able to get those wires fed up through here. All right, so once it's at this point, you've just got one connector here for the speaker. There's another connector back here for the light, and then you've got your OBD connector. For this one, what you're gonna do is slide, you slide the gray lock back, and then you reach up from the bottom side with it open, and you just kind of push up and it'll release out of there like that. So yeah, I'm gonna pull this whole thing out of here. There's just not enough room to work, but. All right, so with the undercover off, I have my 2 wires that I fed down from my gauge. As you can see, the gauge is already installed up here. I already put all this back together. I had just fed the wires down and back. There was a channel that was kind of directly straight back and to the left that allowed me to get them down here. And basically what we're going to be doing is the extending wires for the sensor. We're going to run up through here. That's going to take us into the, sorry, I'm trying to get the focus there. That's going to get us into the DME box, the electronics box up in the cab. And then we can splice our wires together there. The rest of the wires we're going to route very carefully so they don't get tangled up in anything. So up high, we're going to route them over and then probably follow here over to the other side so we can access that fuse box. We might go higher. I'll have to kind of just see how everything lands, but we're going to take the power and ground over to the fuse box area. There might be a ground in here. We'll have to find a ground, but I know we're going to get power from the fuse box, so we're going to run the other one that way. Okay, so on the passenger side, there is one screw down here on the corner that you have to take off. And then you're going to open your glove box. And there are screws across the top here that you have to take off. And then there's one on each side down here. And then once you have that off, you just pull straight back on this and down, and this whole unit will fall to the ground. Alright, so once you got your screws out, this whole unit kind of just pulls towards you to release. There's some clips in there. And then the glove box and everything will just kind of fall out. Probably not necessary to unplug all this. We should have plenty of room to work. But that gave us all the room we needed to be able to run our wires up through here. So we're here on the passenger side. There on my car, I don't know if yours will have it, but you can kind of see up there, my car had a conduit. Let's see if I can get it to focus in on it. Maybe not. My car had a conduit that was already ran inside that plastic protectant for the harness. And I was able to fish with a thicker gauge wire. I was able to fish through there and then tape the end of this wire and pull it through from the other side. Let me show you what the other side looks like. Okay, so we ran the wire. It goes right in that conduit to the other side. I actually fished it up into this channel that goes over the steering column. Follows right there, and then goes up and across up to the gauge. Our other wire is ran down there. It goes up into the DME box right there. So from here, we're done on the driver's side. We can button this all up. Just make sure everything's secured. We've got our sensor wires. I ran them through this boot. It's a little easier to get through this boot. I had already run some wires for the reverse light for my manual swap. You probably won't have that if you didn't do a manual swap, but good spot to run the wires through anyways. So these are those wires that we had cut earlier because they're not long enough, that go to the actual temperature sensor for that gauge. And then these are those wires that we ran up through the dash. I spliced them together, hit it with some heat shrink to make it nice and pretty. Alright, I'll see if I can keep light down here. So now that we've got this pulled over here, we're going to ignore the blue and white wire, and we're just worried about power and ground. As far as ground goes, you could really ground that anywhere there's a good ground. You could ground it to this metal up here if you wanted to. You could run it all the way to a ground, you know, on the grounds that are under the seats if you wanted to get crazy. For me, I know that there's power and ground going to these lights that are down here, that go into the glove box area. Being that this gauge doesn't pull a lot of power, I'm not too concerned about it. So what I'm probably going to do is just splice into one of the ground wires that's feeding the lights under here. Sure, you could dedicate your own ground and maybe ground it up in the DME box if you're really worried about it. But for me, I'm not going to do that. Now, this handy dandy little fuse diagram here tells us that the radio has 2 fuses. As you can see, it's right over here by my thumb, fuse 7 and fuse 41. As you can see, fuse 7 is a 5 amp. It's the third 5 amp from the left up here. According to the diagram that I pulled, that is a key-on power source versus, excuse me, there's a motorcycle going by there, versus fuse number 41, which is a much bigger fuse. That's the constant power. So we're going to use an add fuse and jump from here. We're going to run the wire up over, secure it so that this can still swing without pinching anything. And so basically our wires are going to come up from the back like this. We'll tie one into ground and one into the add fuse here, and that'll give us our power and ground that we're looking for. It'll all be hidden once this is all put away and tucked. The only way you'd see it is drop in the fuse panel. You'd see that add fuse there. I prefer to do that than splicing into power wires wherever possible. So underneath here, we've got our add fuse here. This is what an add fuse looks like if you are unfamiliar. So the original fuse goes in the bottom hole, the new fuse goes in the top hole, and you just plug her in. Of course, now that I'm doing this one-handed, it's difficult, but there we go. You just plug her in, has plenty of room. I pulled that wire up over the top, and I zip tied it real tight. It's this yellow wire here, I had to extend it, but there's a bundle of wires coming down the back. I zip tied it up high. Oh, you can kind of see it right there. There you go. Zip tied it up high to keep the wire pulled down so that it's not up here, so that as this closes, we're not hitting anything. So I verified that we've got plenty of space up here, but that's a key-on source. And then I secured our wires back here. Go ahead and you're going to want to add some heat shrink to the ends, or tape off the ends of those the blue and white wire. They are signal out, I believe. We're not going to be using them, but and then our ground wire I extended up here with kind of the same color wire that they use for the factory, and then I spliced it in to this light wire right here. You could pick really any of these for the ground. So your blue and red is power, and your solid brown is ground. It's going to be the same. Solid brown is going to be ground on all of these wires up underneath here. I found that worked best rather than fishing for a strange ground. And it works. Let's go test it. All right, we're going to go key on. And there we go, showing 82 degrees, which is about proper since my car's not cooled all the way down yet. But yeah, we have power, ground, and temperature sensor all mounted up nice and pretty in our gauge pod, vent gauge pod there. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.